one too.
Okay, you have your own?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. No, mine right there. It's probably Doc's. I'll grab mine. I'm an old NCO, sorry, Major. I'm an old NCO. I take it myself.
Can I do anything for you before we start?
I got this.
Super excited. Just so you know, there's a bunch of people that came for this.
Cool. Works for me.
On the back. Let me make sure they come in the room.
Yes.
Let me get everybody in. 2 minutes. If I give you the thumbs up. You good?
Mood lighting. That'll work, Sergeant Major. Sure. Thank you. Good, thank you.
Dr. Kevin Cameron is a recognized expert in military working dog training and handler performance, combining operational experience with a doctorate in clinical and behavioral psychology. White House recognized contributor and California Veteran of the Year. He advises Congress, the California State Senate, and law enforcement agencies on canine program development. Dr. Cameron offers evidence-based training and consultation services focused on optimizing canine team performance through advanced techniques in communication, stress management, and psychological resilience for both handler and dog. The author of the Cameron Method, Service Dog Training Fundamentals, he sheds light on the value of bridging the gap between training environments, scientific research, and operational success to ensure canine teams are more reliable, resilient, and mission ready. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Cameron.
Thank you. Good morning. I promise you this won't be death by PowerPoint. All right. For one who actually wants to know who I am and all my fancy, wonderful things, ultimately I used to be a dog handler here in the Army. Then I went to be a trainer and a kennel master. The QR codes on here are direct links to my website if you guys want to look up where the research comes from, anything I have to say, and I will be putting this PowerPoint on that website. Why do I do this? That fur ball right there. 2007, I went down to Iraq, and with a dog that I did not trust. He had failed. He had actually been returned back to Fort Riley, Kansas, as a failure to operate downrange in Bosnia, and then he was handed to me to fix. And then magically, the next certification, he decided to find everything. And then I got rapidly deployed to Iraq. So I had to relearn how to trust a dog. And then after he saved my life at least 5 times that I knew of, when he shouldn't have been working at all, it really changed the scope of how we looked at training dogs. Now, give you a little bit of a warning, okay? This is not another operant conditioning brief. You guys have know more about operant conditioning by itself than probably most of the world, okay? This is about developing insight into application. I'm not telling you guys how to train your dogs, right? Everyone has their own way to train dogs. This is about understanding the psychological principles so you can better improve your dog teams. We are not here to hurt feelings, but I am here to challenge ideologies. Please ask questions. As we go through this, ask all the questions you want. This is interactive. I'd rather get your guys' feedback than have you guys fall asleep. Why is this concept important, right? We've had the same types of training issues for over the last 50 years, right? If not longer, okay? Research has identified fundamental deficits of cognitive behavioral psychology, insight into handlers and trainers. Trainers train handlers often based upon their understanding of, quote unquote, how to train dogs. In canine school, we get an overview of psychology, and then we're sent out to the field to OJT, right? Experiential training. Try to get more information, more understanding. But I guarantee right now, if we go to each one of your kennels, you guys are going to use the same words in different ways. There's a big disconnect between science, classroom, and operational application. A lot of times, doctorates, we need their research. We do. It makes us better. But they use lots of big words. A lot of our handlers barely graduated high school. The evolution of the industry, right? Technology, access to information, research, legislation. Most of us in here are older than Google. Our handlers have access to YouTube, Google. ChatGPT is teaching handlers how to train, believe it or not. So we're going to cover a little bit of legislation and research, background and psychological principles, advancing handler and canine communication, resilience, talk about handler mental health, application, and a little bit of troubleshooting. Over the last 5 years, there's been a big push for regulation in the industry, right? Both in the government end, law enforcement end, and service dog industry. All sorts of issues arise, but ultimately, there's a lot of issues with legislation because they rely on research and subject matter expert testimony. Over 782 pieces of federal legislation. That is a lot. Any guesses on how many have passed? 28, roughly. Okay? And they're all about allowing cops to have more dogs, the change of statuses for law enforcement, things like TSA, right? There's been a big push for regulatory standards, creating that ultimate standard. What does a productive dog actually look like? Can we use bite dogs or not? None of that stuff has actually been allowed to pass because subject matter expert testimony is conflicting and misunderstood. Because when that's misunderstood, they bring in the behavioralists, the psychologists. And they're saying, well, they're kind of right, but they're kind of not right. And then when there's conflicting issues, they can't pass. But overall, they're calling for need for standardizations. Just identify that success depends on unified policies and science-based training and sustainable support. All the support for canine stuff, going great. Everything else, not so much. But ultimately, there's a need to bridge the gap between the tradition, innovation, and our actual operational needs. Policy and research. Since 2020, most of you guys don't know, anything within 10 years is considered current research, traditionally. Over 17,000 are related specifically to detection dogs. Over 12,000 specific to police canine. 0 about universal certification standards have been published. Ultimately, they told us what we already know. Yep, we sure know dogs can find odor. No shit, right? But there's a disconnect between the lab and the operational environments. And they're all calling for a need of standardization. They're saying that military branches and law enforcement need partnerships. Well, we already have it. Success depends on unified policy, standardization, science-based training, and sustainable support. Once again, bridging the gap between tradition, innovation, and operational need. Right? Sounds a little familiar from the last slide, right? Legislation operates off research. Key themes, once again, right? Evidence-based behavioral and cognitive psychology and canine learning, right? That's at the handlers, the operators. Shift from primary experiential training ideologies and develop an understanding of actual psychology and sociology principles, like the antecedent behavioral triad, that type of stuff. Incorporating stress inoculation and scenario-based training, basically stress management, understanding what they have to do, developing insight into what's going on, right? And ultimately, more handler training. Sticks on leashes. You guys all heard that term before? Most of you? All right, especially the new guys. Yeah. We all know that canine and training is constantly evolving, right? Okay, let's do a thought experiment. Handler has a dog for 8 weeks, right? But the dog has a problem with outing. How would we normally handle this?
What outing? Ask the question first of which part? Is it the
Call it outing. Outing is primary reward.
Okay. That'd be my first thing, is identify which area.
Okay. So you try to figure out where it's out is issues, but what do trainers and handlers traditionally do?
They try compulsive.
Ah, compulsive, right? Okay. Most handlers and trainers will start correcting. Ultimately, they're guessing and checking.
I think a lot of that's changed though, because at least from my standpoint, propulsion is probably the last thing we go for.
And you know what? That is exactly the point of this briefing. Every trainer has a different standard. Every kennels has a different standard. It's all based upon your experience in the field, working dogs. Ultimately, psychology would say identify the cognitive behavioral antecedents of behavior. Antecedent is just a fancy word for saying the root cause. Right? The root cause is the dog won't let go. That's not the root cause. Ultimately, it could be a deficit in rapport, a lack of understanding of the task. Like we pushed the task too fast, too far before we actually were able to proof it in the dog. Or it could be that lack of obedience and effective reinforcement. How do we fix rapport? If this is a rapport issue, how would we fix rapport?
More time, more meaningful engagement.
Yeah.
Making it a mandatory thing.
Mandatory fun with the dog, right? All sorts of ways, right? But if this is a rapport issues, usually physical correction will not fix that. This is all stuff that most of us already know, but we're not actually teaching our handlers this at a fundamental level, which is causing issues in our dog and training issues. And by the time there's a significant issue with it because it's been going on for weeks at a time, or even comes up to certification, now the kennel masters and trainers are getting involved. Well, we've already been reinforcing this issue. We could have fixed this in the beginning with, go spend time with your dog. Some evidence in cognitive-based psychology here, right? This is what the research ultimately says. The use of ambiguous definition and terminology is required expertise in order, when using scientific application, and is required to be measured, predicted, reproduced, explained, and studied. Everyone in here do training records? That's your research. You guys have to send your handlers to go do these training problems every week. You're trying to duplicate and replicate. Right? You want your dogs to be reliable. Now we're talking about predictability. Okay? Psychology actually teaches us, this applies to both animal behavior and human behavior, right? That insight, antecedent identification, understanding the root of the issue, and clear operational terminology is directly related to performance outcomes, stress management, and the resilience of teams. That means the more they understand about what's actually going on at the base and root level, the better your teams are going to be, the more adaptable they're going to be, and the less stressed out they're going to be, which means they're more effective and more adaptable in the environments we go to. We've talked about this. Understanding and applying foundational psychology principles improves training outcome, decreases training issues. The research shows it decreases training issues by somewhere between 80 to 90%. Including environmental, a drop in false rates, eliminating or decreasing response issues, and so forth. It definitely shortens training times. How long does it take to imprint odor on a dog? A single odor. What do you say? One time. You say one time. You say a day. What else?
The initial training could take a couple weeks.
You say a couple weeks.
Initially, but they've never heard.
We're talking time. How long does it take you to how long do you think it takes you?
That's the point.
All right. That could be a big thing too. What if I told you that understanding the fundamental psychological principles, you can train the first initial odor in probably less than 5 minutes? Now, we're not talking proofing. We're not talking about building reliability. We're talking about that fundamental imprinting. All right. Definitely improves reliability and environmental adaptability. Strengthens the trust in the teams. The handlers then start trusting their dogs more because they have a better understanding of what the dog is actually doing. So when we're telling our dog teams, hey, your dog is on odor, they actually understand what that means. There's a change of behavior. Your dog's throwing change. And builds resiliency. Because it builds rapport between the dog and the handler, and it builds confidence in the dog. Terminology. In science, we call it operational definitions. There's so much different use of words out there, and so many, especially for us, so many different ways to train, right? When we do research, we have these discussions, we have to start with operational terminology. Have to. We all understand what a passive response is. But if I told you that I train all my dogs with a passive response, do you honestly know exactly what I'm talking about? So if you took one of my dogs and they started laying down in a training problem, is that an ideal response? Maybe. Drive. I love the term drive. It is one of the most overused and misunderstood terms in canine training. Your dog's in drive. My dog has a drive issue. But what are they actually talking about? When a dog is chasing down a reward, Kong, tug toy, whatever it may be, they could be doing a prey or play drive, depending on how you look at it in the context of the way you're looking at it. Okay? We all understand this stuff, right? Remember, I cannot stress this enough. There is no one theory of psychology for dog training, cognitive behavioral elements. It is theories that we mesh together in order to create the best outcome for what we're trying to do. Okay? So some theorists will look at this completely different, right? I know some psychology theories that instead of hierarchy, they specifically call it dominance. So oftentimes we'll call it alpha-beta drive. Sometimes competition will be looked at as called aggression. I've seen some with more, I've seen some with less, but this is pretty much coming straight out of the military working dog manual. You guys all recognize the behavioral triad? Anyone not recognize this? We all understand that this is a cyclic thing. How many have heard about the antecedent or effect in relation to the behavioral triad? All the scientists in the back are smiling at me right now, right? So when we're originally taught canine, we're we're taught cue, response, reinforcement. This is how dogs and people things learn. Rah, right? But we're missing two important elements, right? The antecedent, what is the root cause of that behavior or that issue that we're dealing with, right? And then the effect or impact. Science would say this is what we call maladaptive or adaptive, right? Is it meet operational needs? When I train service dogs and my working dogs, my detection dogs, I don't use food as a primary reward. It's not that it doesn't work, because we all know it does, right? It's because the young handlers I'm giving these dogs to do not have a lot of experience in dog training, right? And I don't want their dogs to start snacking in the middle of a problem or an operation. So I eliminate it out of their wheelhouse. We all know it works, but in order to prevent issues for my mission that I do, right? Things that we have to take into account, right? Who likes laser training with the laser pointer concept of teaching our dog to go find things with lasers? It's really cool, right? I started my career as a combat engineer, turning places to make them go boom. IR-initiated devices are not friends with laser pointers. That doesn't mean it's not effective. It doesn't mean I don't use it. It doesn't mean I don't train with it. But we have to evaluate it. Is it effective for what I'm trying to accomplish with my teams? Okay. Some basic cognitive-based skills, right? Rapport falls under socialization. All right? Where does obedience, what skills, what drives are we using in obedience? Generally. Play, pray, possibly competition or aggression, right? There can be hierarchy in there. There can be rapport-based skills in there, especially if the dog's choosing not to eat you, right? What about detection? Pray, play, right? Could be a lot of it. This will ruffle some feathers. Patrol work and detection are chains of obedience-based skills. Who has ever used the term obedience to odor? Yeah, right, I have. Okay? Obedience is a obedience-based skill. Yes, there is rapport. Yes, there is understanding of what the dog's doing and interpretation. But you are still wanting the dog to perform a task, right? We are removing the human emotion out of dog training right now. Okay? We're removing our interpretation of what's going on as a human being. We're not putting human emotions on the dog. We have to see things from the dog's point of view. We talked about adaptive versus maladaptive. Pros and cons to all things. Okay? Food versus toy training. There's pros and cons to everything. As trainers, we need to understand the pros and cons. We actually need to take the time to evaluate it before we engage in it. Not just, can I use this task or this trick that I learned on YouTube to make this dog do a thing? You probably can. But what are the pros and cons to using it, right? Equipment and handler cues, right? Some dog teams have 3-4 collars on their dogs. Some only have one. Some cue their dogs with harnesses. Some don't. We have to understand the pros and cons and the reinforcements that we're using. Ultimately, you have to train for the mission, okay? But this is the difference between a dumb dog and a cognitive dog, a thinking animal. We want a problem-solving animal. If anything else, since this last war kicked off has taught us, we need dogs that are adaptable. We need handlers that are adaptable, which means they need to be thinking. I have literally, when the war first kicked off, I literally watched dogs walk odor, military working dogs walk odor, unless they were given the command to seek. I will tell you right now, I would not be here today if my dog did not choose to find odor without a command. In fact, we trained on it. Let's talk about advancing the canine-human communication. You have questions about that stuff so far? Trying to fly through this a little bit, see if we can catch up on a little bit of time. Okay. Ultimately, advancing canine-human communication involves canine training is more than command, it's contextual, right? We all know this. We have to put in the context of what we're doing. We have to be able to see what's going on. Every handler these days has a phone. If someone is not recording training, you are setting yourself and your handlers up for failure. Because when they're trying to say, oh, I did this, or my dog did this, right? You can slow things down, zoom in, zoom out, and now you can see what's going on. Having an understanding of fundamental cognitive behavioral psychology beyond operant conditioning. If they are using the word drive to explain everything, you are setting them up for failure. If they don't understand what exactly is being cued, then you are allowing them to be set up for failure. If your training records say, my dog has an outing issue, you are setting them up for failure. They need to be applying the cognitive triad to include that antecedent, that cause, right? And the impact. Just think about it, right? I said my dog won't out its primary reward. What is the primary reward for bite work? The bite, right? The snack. The two-legged snack. We don't want him to let that one go, do we? But we want him to let go the other primary reward? Right? It's not that they can't do it, it's just we have to be mindful of what we're doing. I had a police department in California that was having an outing issue. Constant outing issue. The dog would not out the primary reward. The dog would not actually out the decoy. Okay? So I went to go watch training. I was asked to come out and watch training. Beautiful, beautiful bite work. Right? But went out. So I went to go watch them doing detection. Guess what their reward was for detection? A bite tug made out of the same material. Right? 6 months they were having this issue. That's 6 months of reinforcement because they didn't take the time to understand the root cause. Now, after the fact, it's funny as hell, right? But they didn't think it was funny at the time. Understanding the cues, the timing, the reinforcement, and the precision of it, right? All sorts of tools to make that happen, but we have to be aware of this. Our trainers, our handlers have to be aware of this. Trust-based interaction models rooted in psychology. Okay? There are lots of ways to build rapport that's been handed down through the generations of dog training. How many of you actually read it in a book? Saw the research behind it? How many people here think that petting a dog builds rapport? How do you know that?
Through experience.
But is it the petting of the dog that builds rapport?
I mean, it's the interaction.
What's the difference?
The physical touch, using your hand usage for water, for feeding, for reward, for play, for everything else. You touching that dog and have that human interaction is rewarding to some dogs.
Explaining it to a handler like that is a million times better than saying, pet your dog, it builds rapport. Service members are taught to be adaptable. We're taught in basic training to be adaptable. Take this information. This is why we have a commander's intent, right, in the operations order. So no matter what, we know what success looks like. If we just say go pet your dog, and we're not explaining the fundamental principles of it, they're just going to go pet the dog. When there's so many other ways they can take that extra second to build rapport with their dog. Like go feed your dog, right? Simple things. And it builds resilience and adaptability. The handler elements that we need to be aware of: their mental health, stress management, their resilience, right? Their confidence in the dog. I will tell you from experience, nothing sucks more than going to combat with a dog you do not trust. Operational adaptability, okay? They need to know what's going on so they can adapt to the mission. That is why we do briefings, right? But the more they know, the more adaptable they can be. The more they know about the psychology and behavioral and cognitive psychology beyond operant conditioning, the more productive they're going to be. Because ultimately, what's the difference between house rooms and a theater? Look at it contextually, not a whole lot, right? A lot more chairs and crap in the way. What's the difference between searching a stadium and an open area? Not a hell of a lot, if you really think about it. Okay?
When you say not a lot, sir, like, are you talking about your own of it's not a lot, or the dog's view of not a lot? Because you can change an area very drastically by putting one different aspect for a dog. It changes their whole sight picture. It could. Because now we're talking about thinking about the dog, how a dog does.
So you're right, we can change the environment, right? But structurally conducting a search, right, we need to be systematic about what we're doing. There's all sorts of things we can do. You're exactly right, Sergeant Mix, that we can do all sorts of things to change the environment. But the fundamental elements, right, that make up what a stadium area is versus an open area, right, because they're usually both outside, right? We usually have to search a perimeter. We usually have to go back and forth, right? When we're explaining this to handlers, they're fundamentally the same before we start adding the what ifs in it, okay? And if they understand the fundamentals of it, it won't matter what ifs you throw in there, because it's a dog team, which means if the handler doesn't get it, the dog should. And if the dog gets it and the handler doesn't, it still works.
The only reason why I asked that for a handler perspective is one of the best lessons I learned as a dog handler was when I got a level 3 dog, I call it green dog, right? My first one ever, right? And we did a lot of barracks at first, and the first time I ever did theater, right? That I got super heated about it because my dog went 0 for 5 in the theater, and my kennel master take me out of the moment because I was a very emotional handler, and said, how many times has she searched the theater? And I went back to my stats, right? 0. And it's like, so how could you hold that dog to that realistic standard? Because in my brain at that time, as a young handler, I thought building was building, no matter what. So conceptually, I know we're talking about handler elements, but understanding that the dog sees those differently, even though you cognitively can see a building as a building, the dog doesn't think that.
And you're absolutely right. And this is why we're talking about the handler elements right now, okay? Because a lot of us do get overwhelmed in new environments. I remember the first time I walked into a theater and it was angled like this, the stairs were in the way, and I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this thing? Right? You got a question back there?
I mean, you said it. I was going to also tell you, too, you were talking about the handler, but initial experience of an open area, a large field or something else like that, and then going to like the Mercedes-Benz Stadium for a new handler that's on his first task, or
Yep.
it's going to be a lot to try to break down search patterns and all the other elements that go along with searching and building a character in an open area where you could essentially lean back on your lack of training.
Yeah.
Going to an open area, we're not training on something of the size of the Benz Stadium.
Now here, this will blow some of your minds. How many of you have done building clearing, like without a dog? Right? Gone through actual training for building clearing, right? How do we first teach building clearing? Glass house, PowerPoint, right? Rock drills. We rehearse it before we even go in it, right? Operationally, if we're going to go do building clearing, we do that rock drill beforehand, right? How many of you guys do rock drills with your handlers before they go do a training problem? Sometimes. In an operational world, how many times do we do it? Just about every time, right? Things to think about. There's pros and cons to everything. And like I said, I'm not here to tell you guys how to run your kennels, how to train your dogs. I'm here to give you guys things to think about. Dogs are actually learning 24/7, whether we want them to or not. Right? Just because they are not connected to a leash does not mean that we are not reinforcing something. Good or bad, right, wrong, or indifferent. Okay? Behavioral cues, timing, reinforcing precision, right? A lot of handlers will actually, that are trained in a passive sit for odor detection when they go rest their dog, right? I'm tired, I'm frustrated. Sit. What could I be teaching my dog? I could be teaching my dog that it's okay to false respond while doing detection. Does that mean it's going to happen? Depends on the dog. Depends on what other things we're dealing with. But there's pros and cons to everything. As trainers, as kennel masters, as senior leaders, we need to eliminate as many issues as possible. Shaping behavior versus commanding behavior, right? Shaping behavior builds rapport. Commanding behavior is that more compulsive method. I'm going to make you sit because I said so. Even if a dog has been around for a minute, right, and you're new to that dog, we still need to build rapport, right? Yeah. We need to make sure we take the time as if it is a green dog. Make sure that it understands my timing, I understand the dog's timing. Otherwise, it's compulsion. We need to understand the root of the behavior. Okay, well, yeah, you're having a problem, right? Dog's just not finding the aid. No. We need to actually take that minute, slow down, and evaluate the environment. What's going on? Where have we seen this before? Right? What is different between this training aid and the previous training aid? If you were saying, oh, the dog always has issues on water gel, it's probably not the right answer. Okay? Because we're missing something in the behavioral element, behavioral and cognitive elements. Right? When we're looking at things and we're applying this, the more in-depth elements of psychology, these are basically the 4 questions we need to ask. What is actually occurring? Take the human emotion out of it, take the human interpretation out of it, and look at it from the dog's point of view. What is actually occurring? Right? Then we need to find out what the root cause is. Like we talked about not outing a primary reward. Is that rapport issues? Right? Is that a training issue? Is it the dog just extremely high drive and the handler does not have enough depth in their voice to provide a meaningful command or correction? Could be all the above, right? What are the pros and cons of what we're going to do, right? Is it adaptive for the mission? Okay. Let's talk about a little bit of application and kind of look at this from obedience. Now, mind you, this is an old video as a dog handler before. Yes, before I became a psychologist, right? What are the cons of training this way for military working dogs? It very easily could. This happens to be an instructional video for service dog training. But you're absolutely right, and that's what we have to look at it, right? We have to see what's going on. Is this bad dog training? Well, it's not the best video I've ever done, right? But we have to look at the pros and cons of everything. Let's talk about reward. Yes, puppy for clout, right? We already talked about this a little bit before. Toys versus food, right? Versus physical praise. We don't always understand what the dog is getting out of it, right? We throw the dog the toy. We are assuming often that the dog's reward is the toy. How many ever sit back and think, maybe it's because mom or dad threw the toy for me? And his reward is more based upon reward and the interaction between the handler and the dog. Maybe. We have to see it from the dog's point of view. And we only know that through experience. Detection. Talked about this a little bit earlier, right? Understanding the fundamental principles, right? You can cut training time down drastically. If you don't allow your dog to sit during detection, we might be able to prevent more false responses. Depending on how we're looking at training, how we're setting up our problems, are they being realistic? How many of your dogs actually know their training environments? How many of your dogs actually, when they get frustrated, will sit on things like garbage cans, fire extinguisher containers, right? Paper towel dispensers, things that we normally wouldn't put in explosive or real training aid, or real bomb or real drug. These are things to think about, the pros and cons of even where we're planting. If it is not realistic, is it benefiting training? Sometimes we need to train the dog. Sometimes we need to train the handler, right? But we need to see what we're doing and understanding the impact. When we're troubleshooting, we need to base it in psychology, okay? We need to develop insight based in logic with the absence of human emotion and anamorphosizing. I can't say that word very well. Thank you, right? That means putting human emotion on the dog, a human interpretation of what's going on the dog. They do not see the world like we do. Now, this is how we can troubleshoot in a military format. Right? This will be very easy for your handlers to understand. 5-paragraph op order, risk assessment, AAR, and communication. Okay? This, right here. Situation, what is occurring? What are we doing? Okay? The mission, what is a dog supposed to be doing? What does the commander's intent, or what does success actually look like? And operationally define it. Operationally define it means quantify it. I want the dog to be accurate here. I want the dog to do this many times. I want the dog to be able to search for an hour without a reward or without an aid and not false respond. When it's operationally defined, you have a measure of success or failure. Execution, what is the root cause of the issue? What needs to be adjusted in the behavioral triad, the cue, the response, or the reinforcement, right? Define the element that you're doing in the behavioral triad. I'm changing the cue. I think my handler is cueing the dog into a false response, so we're changing the cue. We're removing him out of the sequence. Cut your dog off leash and see if it changes things, right? Develop a training plan. What exact steps are they going to take? Service and support. What resources do you need? Do you need a second set of eyes? Do you need to be recording it? Do I need to get my trainer because I just don't understand what the hell's going on? Command and signal. What am I communicating to the dog from their point of view? From the dog's point of view? Do I need to consult with my trainer or outside consultation? After action report, right? What was supposed to happen? What actually did happen? Canine's interpretation, right? This is the same thing we do for every other mission. The only thing we're adding in here is what is the dog's point of view? What does the dog think it did? Communication. Radio communication 101 is sender, receiver, and feedback, right? What does the handler understand and what happened and why? Does the handler understand what exactly happened, or at least has an idea of what happened? What is their best guess of what happened, and why do they think it happened? Have a didactic conversation about it. What was actually communicated to the dog, intended versus the actual? What did the handler think about everything? What's the trainer's feedback? The trainer, I hate to break it to you, isn't always right. And I'll cover that more in a second. The stress inoculation for handlers and canines involves controlled exposure to build operational reliability, right? Simulated stress environments for real-world conditioning. Training as you fight. Training with biofeedback. Interpretation of behavior, not humanizing the dog. Sensory disruption. We're talking about distance, duration, distractions. Task resequencing. Don't do everything in the same order every time. That's why we vary up obedience. Stress recognition and mitigation strategies. Now, what is biofeedback for dogs? How can we get biofeedback from a dog during training? We get biofeedback every time we train. We normally call this the change of behavior, right? The question is it a positive change that we are looking for, right? Or is it just a change of behavior in the dog that is not adaptive for what we're looking for? We know the dog starts breathing heavily, tongue starts hanging out. That's a change of behavior. Could just be tired. Any questions about this? All right. I'm trying to be mindful of my time. Handler resilience. These are the critical factors affecting handler resilience: education and cognitive behavioral psychology, rapport, trust and the reliability of canine, and mental health resilience. When we take these dogs out, lives depend on us. I remember being a handler, and the first thing that scared the crap out of me most was my dog missing and someone walking behind me getting hurt. Psychological support, right? For the handler. We need to integrate psychological resilience training for all handlers and teams. Okay? We need to treat it like a soft skill. Believe it or not, mental health is not as scary as we think it is. I know, I'm a licensed therapist, okay? Ultimately, what therapy teaches people and how to build stress resilience boils down to understanding the root cause, creating a plan for evaluating the plan for what's really going on, what's actually stressing you out, how can we address it? Sounds like an op order, right? A risk assessment, what are the pros and cons to what we're doing? An after action report, did what you tried to do actually work? And communicating. We give direct guidance and direction and orders. We make sure our troops hear it, understand it, and we get feedback for it. Okay? How many of you have asked your troops, said, how you doing? And all they say is okay. What the hell does that mean? Right? Roger, Sergeant Major. Prevention of operational stress injuries and burnout, right? Clear terminology and understanding of the principles lead to adaptability, resilience, and improved health outcomes, right? Normalizing stress. Stress is normal. Empathize, do not validate. Yes, I understand you're having a hard time. Not, I understand this is hard for you. That is how we create people that are adaptable. We empower problem solving and adaptability. This is why we have the commander's intent in an operations order. We are trying to build adaptability and ultimately seek consultation. That doesn't mean they have to go see a therapist. That means you guys have to reach out to someone else who knows more than you do. All right. Final thoughts. Effective canine teams are built at the intersections of science, trust, and adaptability. Psychological theory and educational strategies actually reduce failure and increase mission success. Training must evolve in order to meet the needs of the teams and the operational demands. Handlers are trainers. Since the dogs are learning 24/7, the handlers are trainers, and we need to overqualify them in what they're doing. And we need to seek consultation as needed. Any questions? Any comments? Any gripes or complaints? I know it's early, but come on, guys. I thank you very, very much. All right. I know I'm giving this brief again tomorrow, I believe. If you guys want any other consultation or any other questions about this, more actual in-depth training, because this is a very brief overview, I do have cards on the back table, or you can come get me, and I will give you my contact information directly. But consultation is kind of what I do. And if you have any other questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you guys for having me out here today.
Good morning, leaders. Sergeant Major LaBelle and Colonel Curry. Sergeant Major Levine and Colonel Curry would like to present a certificate of appreciation for Dr. Kevin Cameron of Cameron Psychology. The Office of the Provost Marshal General wishes to express our sincere appreciation for supporting as a subject matter expert during the 2025 MWD Leadership and Training Symposium. Your expertise was instrumental in the success of this event. We are proud to recognize your contribution to ensuring our handlers and their working dogs are better prepared to defend this nation. Signed, Verdina LaBelle, Sergeant Major, U.S. Army MWD Program Manager, and John K. Curry, Colonel, Deputy Provost Marshal General.
Thanks, Ahmed.
Professional development. Professional development. You gotta give him a chance.